all join me for a quick little demo. I just want to hopefully keep you guys all excited about clay, and just maybe inspire you a little bit. This little demo I've been excited to share with you and learn. It's something that I picked up from Christine Kosiba, and I've mentioned her a lot during some of my classes. And if you're not familiar with her work, I would recommend checking it out. You know, just Google her name. It's Christine, Chrisistine, Kosiba, Kosiba. So write that down or check that out or email me if you want me to share some images with her. So today I'm going to be demonstrating this little wren. And if you've done an animal with me before, you know, if it's an animal you're not extremely familiar with, or even when you're familiar with, you'll want to do a little research as far as printing out images. So I've printed out just some different angles of a bird and also how different artists have rendered that bird. You've got this simple, more contemporary example here. And if you can't see very well, I'm happy to email any of these images. And then I also have a detailed shot of a bird wing over here. And, you know, as an artist, you want to take that artist license and decide how detailed do I want it, or do I want to keep it simple? And it's always nice to see how other artists have rendered a piece. So this little technique is a little combination of pinching and starting with a solid form. So first, she would call these potatoes. So I've got a very loose potato bird kind of skeleton here, not skeleton, but core here. And then once you get that shape, and this is pretty wet clay out of the bag.
You're being Tito bombed.
What's that?
You're being Tito bombed.
Oh, he's being quite pitiful. He hurt his paw, but I can't.
He heard his name. Hi, Tito.
Hey, they hear you.
I saw his ears hovering around the back of you. It was pretty funny.
He's being so pitiful because he's just limping around, but I can't see why. I don't know what he does. So the next step, I've got this little bird core here. Then this is the scary part. You just cut it in half, whether it's with a wire tool or an old steak knife that I have here. Cut that pretty much, cut that potato into 2 pieces. And I'm gonna now pinch those out. So if you need a little refresher on pinch pots, some of you may have seen Martha Cook. She posted a cool pinch pot demo on YouTube.
It's a good video.
Yeah, you can just Google that. Google, or not Google, YouTube. If you go on YouTube and look Martha Cook up, or look at her Facebook page, you can probably find that video. But as you guys, most of you know, just pinching that clay out, feeling for evenness through that wall. You see how I now have a shell of that potato form? I'm going to do the same with the other half. And I'm doing this particular technique on a very small scale, but Christine does this for her larger animals too, as well. She has some fox and just beautiful wolves, very large scale, that she basically does, cuts in half, starts with the core, cuts in half, and does giant pinch pots and scores them together. So now I basically have 2 pinch pots, and they don't line up perfectly, but that's fine. It's still wet clay. I'm now going to score those 2 surfaces. You all know the deal, and score that up. Score these 2 walls. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And feel free, if you have a question, feel free to just shout it out. There's not too many people that I think will be talking over each other too much.
You can also type it in the chat room. There's like a little chat area. You can add a question there.
That's too advanced for me. I'm just trying to keep Julia big enough where I can see her. I mean, it keeps popping back into other things. So
you just hover. There's if you hover over her image, you'll see 3 little dots pop up in the upper right hand side of the image. Do you see that on her picture?
Well, maybe because I'm on a pad, it's a little different.
Oh, it may be different. Okay.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
You see 3 little dots?
Yeah, and it says, okay, chat, meeting settings, virtual background, raise hand.
Yeah, do you see, yes, do you see, or actually, do you see something that says pin video?
No.
No? Oh.
I see stop video and.
No.
Yeah, sorry. It's only my second time on Zoom, and the other one was a cocktail party, so quite different. It was on a phone, too. Oh, well, sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
So yeah, if you see somewhere that says pin my video, that would keep me larger, or maybe you can double click.
You're larger right now. I just kept touching things until I got you large, so it's good. I'm good. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. No, I want to figure this out with you guys. All good questions. So as you can see, I've pinched both of this form out into 2 little pinch pots. I've scored that surface, and I'm just going to compress them together. They're not going to line up perfect, but I'm going to rework that a little bit. So now I have a hollow form. Now, if your 2 sides don't line up perfectly, take a little bit of wet clay, roll out a coil, and I'm just going to compress that into that seam where those 2 sides don't meet up as well. And I'm going to start shaping that tail just a little bit. They've got some long tail feathers. I'm just going to start compressing that out. And you may have heard me say this before, when you've scored 2 surfaces that are now wet, you want to give them some time to stiffen up. So I'm not going to rework this form too much more at the moment, and a couple minutes just to stiffen up. When it's wet, slip, when you get in there and start pushing it around, those joints will slip off, and that form you just worked for will distort. So I'm going to leave that maybe sitting over here and show you another technique. So he's going to sit right there. I think he needs maybe a little prop so he doesn't face plant. And again, just giving those scored surfaces some time to stiffen up. The next thing I wanted to demonstrate was some branches for him to sit on. And I went ahead, if it's something that you can't have in front of you, like a bird, obviously print some detailed images out and reference material. You may have heard me recommend doing an image board. Those are always helpful when you can look at your piece and look at the inspiration for that piece. And that is if you can't have whatever form you're making directly in front of you. So I just went and got some branches from outside. And I want to really mimic the movement of the branch, and hopefully these branches won't just look like flat coils on the ground. I really like this one for that surface. I don't know if you can see the fungus, but that may become inspiration for the glaze or surface design later on. So I think most of you have rolled coils before, but just a quick reminder if you haven't. When I'm starting a coil out, I like to go ahead and set my coil up for success by just doing some compressions around in my hand and kind of making a little circle. So I'm just compressing, turning it around. Again, always feeling for even thickness through that clay. And now with my little pickle, if you find your clay is a little bit on the wet side, or sorry, the drier side, you can add just a little water to your table or your canvas, and that'll help keep the coil hydrated as you roll it out, because oftentimes they'll dry and crack. You don't want to completely hydrate your whole area and then have a soppy, wet coil. But just if you hydrate a little area that it's going to roll through to keep it from cracking. So another technique I'm going to share, and most of you may know this already, but when I discovered it, it was just a life changer. As soon as that coil goes doo-doo-doo, you feel it, you can kind of hear it. It's got a little flat spot almost immediately. If you put that twist through it, you know, just like a candy cane twist, and then roll that twist out, that'll help even that coil back out. So I'm going to roll a few coils. And I'm going to carrot the coil down, which means I'm adding a little more pressure to one side to make it look, you know, exactly like a carrot, how the carrot comes down to a point. So a little more pressure on one side. And coiling, just like anything else, takes practice. Sometimes I get in the studio and the coils are spot on. Sometimes it's impossible for me to roll an even coil. For this particular technique, I do not need perfect coils, so that kind of works to my advantage. So I've got a few carrot coils going on. I want to have a few options for branches as I build this little twig. And really, when you're applying pressure, you're letting the table do most of the work. It's just gentle compressions on the top of that clay, letting the table do most of the work. And you can see on my hand where, well, maybe not in the video, but I usually just use this part of my hand to compress, mostly from the tips of my fingers to my knuckles. But everybody's hand's different, and I always say whatever's comfortable for you may be different for what is comfortable for my hand. So it's all about the feeling. So next, I'm going to take this little, you could do a dowel. This is just a long paintbrush. And I'm going to stick that through my carrot coil as central as possible. And then take a couple passes, continuing to roll that coil out. And now I have a hollow tube of a branch coil going on. Next, I want to add some texture. And I'll develop this texture a little more later on, maybe with actually taking a branch or a piece of bark to compress directly into the clay. But for the time being, I just want to get a nice twist of texture through that coil. And I'm just taking my thumb and doing some compressions into that carrot. So I'm going to, again, make a few so you have options. You know, each branch is a different thickness and has different movement to it. And again, the cool thing about doing branches is if these coils get torn and you feel they're uneven, all the better to capture the organicness of the movement of these branches. So we got 1, 2. if you guys don't have any clay at home, one project that I was thinking would be making templates. I feel like when we get to class, we never spend the time making templates, paper templates, and most of you guys should have a ruler and scissors, I would think. But if you Google ceramic templates, there's a million ideas out there. But to take the time and create your own and really make it one of a kind would be something that when we are able to get in the studio again, you can hit the ground running. All right, I kind of like the movement in this one the best. So that might be my main branch that I build off of. And I'm just going to go ahead and start sitting that branch up and making some props. And I'm going to use this. So once you get your branch in place, you don't want to have to pick it up and move it. So whether it's a wear board that you start building your form on, or one of these Lazy Susans, I would recommend having it on something you can transport. And so that once it's built, you don't have to distort the shape that you've worked really hard for. So I'm just going to start getting some movement in this branch by propping these ends. And again, I want to look at how these side branches and how this moves for inspiration. Also thinking about balance and eye movement with these. How you always want to consider how does your eye move around the piece, and the branches can really control that by those points. You usually want the viewer's eye to, move out and continue around the form, especially working with three-dimensional work. All right, so I think I'm going to have this back one extend. And I'm just going to cut that at an angle, the same angle that I'm going to attach it. And it may be hard to see, but I'm going to score that on this side of the branch. So with my little scoring tool and a little water, I'm just going to score that on. And notice that this branch was hollow at the beginning of putting the dowel through. And now after cutting it and compressing it, I've closed that opening. So it's going to be really important for me to go in towards the end and hide some air holes anywhere I've closed a form. So I'm going to compress that on. And that might be all this branch needs. I feel like much more might take away from the form. So now I've got a basic branch built, and I may end up adding more to it later on. I know ideas are always changing, but I just want to play around with the shape. So I've completely flipped that branch upside down, and that would be interesting, an interesting base for this bird. I would just have to make sure to properly support it. But since we only have limited time, I'm going to keep it kind of simple and work with gravity more than against it. So keeping it low and propping these branches up.
There's Julia. She's making clay. Clay for art. Clay for art.
Mm-hmm. Matthew. All right, so I've given my bird a little bit of time to stiffen up, let that joint stiffen up. And he's already kind of coming alive to me. Looks like a little silhouette of a bird. And then the beak, as you know, that's going to completely determine what type of bird, if you want it to be a very specific bird, or what species of bird are you trying to sculpt. But for right now, I'm going to stay on the more contemporary, simplified side of things and do a simple little triangle beak. So with a tiny pinch of clay, I'm going to roll that into a ball and make basically a little cone that I've scored one side on the rounded side, on the smaller rounded side of this form. And I'm just going to compress that on. And now that reads bird to me. So again, you can leave it as simple as this, and then also, but also take it as far as you want. I've seen some wonderful artists go in and render each feather, which is just incredible, but I might go cuckoo doing that. I do want to demonstrate how to sculpt the wings for you, but first I'm going to go ahead and set him on the branch. Do you guys think he looks better? Again, we want to think about that movement, bringing those branches around. I could set him on like very centered, or have him slightly tilted, but just play around with how all those angles look. Do you guys think one looks better than the other? Any feedback, or is it hard to see?
I can see it. I like it kind of sideways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I sort of liked it facing the Y a little bit.
I like him like that.
That way?
Yeah.
And this side versus this side?
I like it the other way.
Yeah, I like the other way.
Yeah.
So for right now, I'm not scoring them on, but I do want to tack them in place and do a quick little wing demo for you. Let's see, how are we on time? We're pretty good. All right. So you've got the idea for the branches. I'm just going to set those out of the way and give that branch a little bit of time to stiffen up before I score them on. If this was a really heavy bird and I tried to immediately score them onto the branch, that branch would just flatten. Right now I have two little supports to hold the majority of that weight. It's important, if you want a branch to look branch-like, branches don't flatten where these fat little round birds sit on them. They keep their shape. So just something to consider. So back to the wings. Again, there's so many different ways to render the wings. I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of a larger wing, just so you guys can see it better, and then probably make some smaller ones for him or her. To throw out a slab, I'd be happy to, if anybody wants a whole slab rolling or a slab thrown demo, I'd be happy to do that. But I'm just throwing out a small one for right now. I feel like a lot of my hand builders depend on that slab roller, and if you're doing a home studio, it's really such an expensive piece of equipment that you don't really need if you practice throwing slabs out, just like you need to practice coiling. All right, so for this one, again, I'm doing a pretty large wing, and I'm going to draw this little diagram in Sharpie so you can see it better. I don't think the pen is very visible. But basically, all birds, their wings are different, a little slightly different shape. You want to think about, do you want this bird to be landing, taking flight? What kind of energy and expression do you want your sculpture to portray? But just a simple wing demo. I'm thinking about the shoulder of that wing. I've basically got, I don't know, it's kind of a raindrop with a slight curve up here. And then when you're building up the feathers on this wing, you start from the longer feathers. And some of you may know a little more about the bird anatomy and bird wings, but what are the longer feathers called? Does anybody know?
Flight feathers, I think, but I'm not sure on small birds.
So when sculpting, think about how those feathers are layered on the bird's wing. And they've got quite a few different layers. The flight feathers, which are these longer ones, and those are the ones you're going to start with. And then these kind of middle. And obviously each bird is different, so you'd want to study each bird. And again, I don't know if each layer feather has a different name. I know the tiny ones are the down feathers. There's tiny layers closer to their shoulders. So when sculpting, again, start with these longer flight feathers layering up. And you can take each layer of feather, again, as far as you want with detail. I've seen people go in and draw almost each little line into that feather. And then, so you move this way, then you build up where number 2, number 3, and then the last ones you layer up are number 4. And I will demonstrate a rough example of how to do that. On a larger scale. So everybody can see my rough feather there, or wing. Starting with little coils. And this is wet clay on wet clay, so I'm not worried about sculpting. I'm going to start compressing and moving, always moving in the direction of the feathers, whether it's fur or feathers. You want to kind of capture that energy in the natural direction that they move. So I've got my long flight feathers, moving to step 3. Layering some mid-length feathers. And this texture might be quite hard to pick up through the Zoom video, so I'd be happy to send some detailed shots over, or if you want to see some wonderfully rendered wings, go look at, actually, Betsy's, I know you've done some wonderful feathers, Chelsea, and also, again, look up Christine Kosiva's work. Some of her wings are just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And now I'm getting into these down feathers where they're shorter, and I'm doing a lot quicker movement, or shorter compressions with this clay. Building up. And I started with the slab. I always want to take care of that rim, the outside of that slab, keeping the slab thick, but making it appear smooth and thin and feather-like. So this wing is quite a little too big for this bird, obviously, but I wanted you to be able to see how to layer that up from large to small. And then when attaching to your bird, this is another thing, how I played around with the placement of the bird on the branch. I also want you to play around with the wings, the wing placement. This is another way you're going to capture what feeling you're trying to portray, emotion, what the bird, if he's taking flight, what action. And also maybe he doesn't even need wings at all. But just again, if you could see, sorry, I'm just doing it for myself. I forget I need to hold it this way. If you can see, just playing around with different positions is going to completely change what that bird is doing. And then again, thinking about the anatomy of the bird, how is that wing attached? I picture them to have little shoulder blades under all those feathers, just like us. And this is their shoulder where it comes into their body. So of course you're going to want to score really well through there. And maybe you want that wing to appear as though he's about to take off and it's, or he's just landed. When scoring on, I would do a little prop under here just to hold it in place, because obviously that thin slab would not be able to support itself by just scoring in the shoulder blade. So again, another little prop in there, if you can see that.
You would remove that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just to let it dry while it's, yeah.
And if you're not comfortable removing it through the firing and you want to keep that wing, that prop there in place, I would just put a little piece of paper towel in between the clay and the wing, and that'll burn away as soon as this is. You can just knock that prop out.
That's a great idea.
And it's not going to stay in place, obviously. But what else? That's about it for the wings. And then again, if you've heard me do a demo before, you save all the finer detail for last and the more delicate things for last. So, you know, I might get in here and compress a little bit. So I might not want to completely finish rendering these wings yet. But once I get it scored on, propped, maybe I'll go back and draw some accents of the wings. That's fine detail with a pen tool or something. I don't know if you can. You probably can't see those fine lines. And then of course, you know, sculpting that beak, and then sculpting some little feet. So again, fine details for last. I'm going to go ahead and score that on and show you how I would do the little feet, and then we'll open it up for discussion or questions. And if you guys have any questions I can answer, I'd be happy to. I really appreciate everybody joining in today, and I'm also open if there is a specific demo you guys wanted to see, please shoot me an email. I am inspired just as much by you guys as hopefully I can inspire you. The creative community is so important for working and developing thoughts and ideas. So I've loosely scored the bottom of my bird and the branch. And what I might do to play around with some of this texture is just break a piece of this branch off and compress that through the twig. Again, playing around, is he facing down? Is it facing down? Is it looking up? So many options. But what is going to keep your eye, keep the viewer's eye on the piece? I forget, I heard somebody say at museums how long you want to consider, how long do the viewers look? How long would you look at a piece of art in a museum? And what would keep you looking longer? And it's just something to consider when you're sculpting your own work. And so you probably won't be able to see because it's so tiny, but why not add some little feet on there? And I'll show you real quick how to do that. But typically I might go in and render the branch a little more, and again, saving the fine detail like the feet for last. But just for demo purposes, let's get some little feet on there. All I'm doing is taking a little pinch of clay, and I'm going to roll it into tiny coils. And I'm trying to grab the same amount of clay, so each one of these tiny little coils are even. And let me put it on this side of the board. It's so tiny. I can do it at a larger scale actually. So I've got 3 tiny coils that are kind of flattened now. And I'm just going to compress one side. And now I've got a little bird foot. And he's trying to fly away. And that would just score and kind of tuck under that belly. Obviously, on different scales, you can kind of handle detail a little differently. Some of those birds of prey, you don't realize until you start studying images, or maybe you've seen them in person, that their talons are just huge. And, you know, that could be a whole art piece on its own, just rendering those talons. But let me show you what I did on a little bit larger scale for that tiny little foot peeking over. I just wanted to keep it on a smaller scale for today's demo because I know we all have limited space. Oops. All right, so for that foot, all I did on a much smaller scale is roll out 3 coils, 3 little coils, and then I'm gonna pinch them together on one side and tuck that under the belly and score it to the branch really well. And then, you know, you still want that branch to be very branch-like. Again, going back and rolling, compressing or carving some texture in there is never a bad idea. And then very last step, I said, I was a little incorrect when I said the last step would be adding that fine detail in, but the very last step, and actually it can be a step you take all the way through. Does anybody know what that would be when you're when you've sculpted and you have a hollow form? What is the last step that I usually say to remember to take? I see you waving your hand.
Stick a hole in it. Open it up.
Always stick a hole in it. Yes, thank you. And again, I may have closed this branch up, so I'll hide a little hole under there. I can hide a little hole under the bird. And I'm set. So I'll add a little more detail, but for demo purposes, I wanted to keep it short and sweet today. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes, Betsy?
So if you were going to put eyes on your bird, how would you do it?
So their eyes are very round to me. That's actually a great question. What I would do is start with maybe an indent. And of course, depending on the scale, sometimes I'll take things a little further in detail. But for this bird, I'm going to keep it pretty simple and as symmetrically as possible. I'm just going to make a little indent for these eye sockets. And I think I want to add a little more around his face to shape it. But for the time being, I'm just going to make a little indentation where those eyes will go. Do you see that? And then with loose scoring, I'm going to grab 2 little balls of clay. And I usually grab 1 piece of clay and then try to split that in half as perfectly as possible. You don't want one eye a lot bigger than the other. I'm going to hold them up to see if those are way too big or way too small, but these look okay. So I've made 2 indents, scored a little bit, and I'm just going to compress those 2 little dots on there. But sometimes when I compress them, they lose that round shape. And again, when I look at birds and their eyes, what stands out to me is that perfect circle. They look wide and perfectly round. So I'll find something, again, depending, like it's so funny. Like this marker to me, I keep it in my toolbox because this is about the size of a bunny's eye, and they're also really round. So I'll use this to kind of trace and compress that little round ball on. But I need to find something that is round, about the same size of those, to kind of give it a little more, keep that round shape. And I would say the end of this mechanical pencil, taking that eraser out, I've got a perfectly round tool. I got lead falling out, where I can go in and compress around that eye. And that might be a little too big, but I'm keeping that on. Now he looks really surprised to go in and define that eye. But that's how I keep those eyeballs nice and round. I feel like this guy needs a little more eyebrow on this side. So I may build that up a little bit before I do the eyes. Again, the eyes would be a little later step once I've gotten the shape of the face just right. Does that answer your question with the eyes?
Yes, thank you.
Some animals, well, a lot of animals, they have eyelids. You want to consider, how do their eyes move? How do the lids move? And building that up can make all the difference. And also thinking about the focal point of your piece. Some areas I keep fairly simple, and then some I take the detail a lot deeper, and that's going to keep the viewer's eye moving around. They'll stop it. Let's say the feet were highly rendered, that might become a focal point and help your eye move around the piece. Anybody have any other questions? That was a great one with the eyes. I know they're important.
Julia?
Yeah.
Could you talk about the tail a little bit? Because you sort of shaped it up super fast and then.
Okay, yeah, actually, good question. So I've pulled it a little bit, but I want to add some tail feathers in here. I'm just going to start pulling that kind of as if I'm pulling a handle, if you've ever pulled a handle. Keeping it thick structurally, I want to keep it nice and strong, connected to this main source, but I want it to appear thin and feather-like, so pinching the ends. When doing any form, it's best if you can pull it from one large piece of clay, because when you get into scoring and slipping and adding each one of these little feathers on, you've created a kind of delicate place for that to break. So I've got this elongated pulled tail feather, but I want to maybe make it a little longer and add a little more feathers to it. I'm taking quite wet clay out of the bag here, and I'm going to do some loose scoring. It probably doesn't even need to be scored. And with long coils, thinking about how long those tail feathers are, I'm just going to compress these coils to mimic a feather look. Instead of sculpting each one. Again, dragging that clay and elongating it to mimic the length of those long tail feathers. And anytime you have a soft piece of clay, you always want to, if you're doing any kind of compression, making sure to support the other side with your So sometimes if my finger isn't doing the trick to mimic the texture I want, I'll find a little tool. So I've added some to thicken that up. And let me see what little tool, wooden tool I have around here. So this one, it's kind of like my finger, but I just want to compress a little more texture in there. And that might be about all I do for the tail feather with this one. Maybe adding them a little longer or adding a little more of a point. So can you see that okay? Any other questions? And once I have some things on there, I can show you some detailed images. And I know not everybody has access to clay, but you guys are all creative people, so I imagine you're finding other creative outlets to get that part of your brain working. And I'd love it if you shot some emails to me. This is what I've been working on, even if it's just your garden or some sketches. I can't draw at all, so any drawings I'm always very impressed by. And then also, don't forget, if you work on some templates, I would be so proud of you. Because I know that's one thing that I work on. I never want to spend time doing templates. This is a simple cup template, but look online. There are some crazy templates you can design at home without having clay. And then when you do have clay again, you know, make some incredible pieces. Also, if you guys have anything that you've just been jonesing to make and get back in the studio and make, share that with me. Again, I love your ideas, and I love to, you know, build off your ideas and just see where your head's at creatively. Any more questions? If you guys like to do this again, shoot me an email of a specific demo. You know, it could be as simple as, how do you throw out a slab, or, you know, the horse. Of course, I'd always love to sculpt a horse, but even something you haven't seen me done, you know, it's challenging, and I'd be open to try it and learn with you how to figure out any details of creating anything new.
So this is a question from my daughter, but I am also interested. Do you or anyone on the call have experience making chia pets?
For a challenge.
I have this bag of Lizella, and she's like, that looks like chia. We should, when we have these chia seeds, and I'm like, okay, we can try that. But
I love it. See you guys.
Yeah, Tamara
does?
I actually have a little experience from one of Angela Bush's classes. She wanted us to use all natural stuff. And so I made like a sconce type of thing and put the chia on it.
Uh-huh.
And the chia will sprout.
Yeah.
In the wet clay. Now,
in the wet clay itself. Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It grew. It created lines. It did all sorts of things. Now, when it was fired, the chia obviously burned away, and then you had those lines. So which of course I loved, but I don't know if that's going to satisfy your daughter, because she probably wants the chia to grow on the.
Which they do. I mean, you know, they're all over Mexico. They're made of terracotta clay. You just set it, if I remember correctly, you just like set it, the terracotta piece, in a dish of water, and it draws up enough moisture for the chia to grow.
Do you think if it's bisque, because bisque will still absorb water to a certain
That's what
degree?
I was thinking. I was thinking stop at the bisque stage and try it.
That's an awesome idea.
Okay.
It's worth trying. It's definitely worth trying, because
I mean, you know, because all they have, like the only thing that I know of that makes it stay on is they have those scrape marks. So there's some texture for it to adhere to at the beginning, and chia is all sticky anyway. Anyway, okay, so that's where I'm going next.
It looks like they do kind of like a chia pudding type of thing when it's being spread on.
Yeah.
Like, you know, people are making chia pudding so that it gets those round.
Right.
So maybe do it that way.
Exactly. Oh yeah, let it soak first, and then
make it like a chia pudding, and then
I see what you're saying. Yeah. That's a good idea.
So if you were to do a chia animal, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, well, what I was thinking would be so cool about making your own is that they could be all sorts of fantastical creatures, right? Or even abstract shapes, because the ones you buy in kits, I mean, again, in Mexico, we've seen it. There must be 10,000 different, I mean, they have nobody's paying money to license, you know, characters. So there's Spider-Man and Batman and Star Wars and everything you could possibly want. But I liked the idea of making some on our own that were just purely for exploring where the seeds could grow or what that adds to the empty space that you've left in a sculpture. So I'll report back.
That's cool.
Cool.
I'll look into that a little more. So that's
Yeah. And I have not Googled a single thing. I'm sure the instructions are somewhere, you know, but if I find them first, I'll let y'all know.
Yeah, maybe the seeds, I guess. It's just the seeds and the pigs.
Yeah.